Number 10. The Battle of Cannae. In 216 BC, Hannibal led his army from Carthage, aka Egypt, through western Africa over to Spain and up through the Alps with his 100,000 soldiers accompanied by elephants, losing half of them along the way. Despite traveling an amazing and perilous distance, the general managed to win 2 battles and set up a base of operations in Rome. Concerned of their losses and eventual destruction of their empire, the Romans decided to appoint Gaius Terentius Varro to command a major direct assault to end the war once and for all. With 90,000 soldiers at his command, Varro sent his heavy spearmen in classic Roman style, followed by legionnaires in the back. With less than 50,000 soldiers, malnourished and weary from the journey, Hannibal pulled off one of the greatest victories in history. Instead of meeting the Romans with his best troops, he put his best on the flanks and let the Romans drive straight into the center, not knowing that they were actually setting up a trap. The thousands of men behind the first line of Roman spearmen kept pushing each other forward until they were completely surrounded by Hannibal's forces. Too late to escape, the Carthaginian cavalry rode through them, slaughtering 50,000 men and defeating the Romans in one of the worst battles the world has ever seen. Number 9. The Battle of Changqing. Ever played Dynasty Warriors? 260 BC saw one of the largest battles ever known to man, with 1 million army men, swords and all, clashing in a ridiculously large fight. In a time period called the Warring States period in ancient China, the state of Zhao was being invaded by the Qin, and within 4 years they encircled the enemy army by taking roads and fortresses in the neighboring mountains. The Qin had 550,000 soldiers, but knowing that their enemies had 450,000 didn't make them feel all too comfortable with odds. Using one of the older tricks in the book, the Qin sent secret agents into the enemy army to spread rumors that their leader was too scared to go out and fight their army. Challenged, the Zhao sent their army into the field and up the mountain pass. Like Cannae, the opposing army retreated partially into their fortress, while the Zhao raced forward straight into a trap of 30,000 cavalry armed with long-range weapons. As they began to retreat, the mounted units surrounded both the army and their fortress. Unable to escape, the Zhao army was dug into the hills and besieged for 46 days. They were unable to escape their encirclement and lost 400,000 of their men trying to break free. Horrifyingly enough, many of the 50,000 soldiers they captured were buried alive in order to spread fear in the populace. They claimed to have only let 200 of the youngest soldiers go so that their stories terrorized the survivors. In total, 550,000 bodies were buried. Number 8. The Battle of the Somme. Let's take a step into more recent history. The largest and worst battle of World War I saw a terrifying amount of casualties from day one. Before we get too deep into this, imagine this. The largest American football stadium can fit 100,000 people. Now imagine a little more than half of those people as casualties on a field within 24 hours of the first offensive. Don't forget the numbers are actually dead people that don't just disappear, but lay screaming in pain from horizon to horizon. As the Allies moved forward, the Germans let loose with machine guns and shells, blowing up their bunkers as the enemy advanced. In total, 8,000 Germans lost their lives, killing 60,000. Machine guns totally changed the way the wars were fought. The only way to advance was to almost literally climb a mountain of bodies and hope to God you made it to the other side, where the real fight began. Within a few months of the Somme, the British and French moved only a few miles. The Somme campaign suffered 1.3 million casualties by the end, with no victory for either side. Number 7. The Falaise Pocket. Almost unthinkably, the Allies managed to land on the beaches of Normandy in Operation Overlord and push the Germans way back off the coast. Within 2 months, the Americans had cleared out western Normandy from Omaha and Utah Beach all the way down and around the city of Mayenne. Realizing that the British, Canadians, and Polish would come sweeping from the north as the Americans came around southeast, Hitler's 7th Army raced to retreat back to a more defensible position. As a result, both the Allies and the Axis raced to either encircle or escape encirclement. German counterattacks failed, and their rearguard crumbled under the weight of the overwhelming Allied numbers. As the Germans fled for their lives, the Allies finally surrounded the retreating army around the towns of Troon and Chambois on August 17th, just 5 days after the plan was enacted, abandoning most of their equipment and broken vehicles along the way. The only path the Axis had into the mountains was already held by Polish tanks. Though relative to other battles, only about 60,000 casualties were sustained by the Axis. It was essentially a turkey shoot. The Germans had almost no chance, and surrounded, they were ultimately defeated. At least they weren't buried alive when captured. Number 6. The Fall of Tenochtitlan. This battle is one of the ultimate defeats in history. After all, it meant the fall of the entire Aztec civilization. Back in the 16th century, Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés marched through what is now Latin America and left only death and destruction in his wake. Initially on peaceful terms, the Spaniards made allies with some 20,000 native troops. But suddenly, the tension spilled over, and a Red Wedding type of event happened, and over 300,000 soldiers of the Aztec Empire were poised to defend their city. Cortez's forces, numbering 1,300 and 2,000 native allies, fled from the center of the massive city where revolts began. Leaping from canal to canal under ranged fire, swimming, drowning in their armor, the Spaniards and natives escaped west to Tlaxcala. They made it as far as the Otumba Valley, where the remainder of the Spanish army was met by a massive Aztec army. It was here that the cavalry surprised the Aztecs, cutting down hundreds of men unstopped. Cortés found the Aztec general dressed in full regalia and continuously sliced the people carrying his throne, creating a non-stop flow of death. Losing half their troops, the Spanish were down to just half of 650. Still, they managed to slowly siege Tenochtitlan, being attacked night after night, watching their captured comrades being taken to be sacrificed on the steps, hearts ripped out. In the end, Cortés had killed thousands of Aztecs, only losing about 100 to sack the city. The victory can be attributed to the smallpox that killed thousands of Aztecs and Aztec commanders, but also to the tactics of the Spanish and native allied army. 100,000 warriors and 100,000 civilians died defending their capital. It ended decisively in favor of Cortés. Number 5. The Maasai Rebellion. The Germans owned parts of Tanzania in 1905. As a colonized people, the native Bokero people began to revolt. Thousands of them began to march from their villages with pre-modern weapons like spears and attacked the Europeans. Marching onto the German garrisons, they believed that the bullets fired at them would turn to water. Well, they were terribly wrong. Approaching the main garrison at Mahenge, defended by only a few hundred people, thousands of rebels launched an unorganized assault. This story is one defining moment in a modern versus pre-modern civilization. Although they were outnumbered at least 4 to 1, they had 2 machine guns, hundreds were cut down, and only after 15 minutes, the attackers retreated. Throughout the battle, no one could get within 3 steps of the defenders. As the rebels continued to fight in the entire war, the Germans lost only 15 of their own and about 300 of their allies at the cost of 10,000 Bokero. A machine gun can be worth the firepower of 100 men with rifles. Number 4. Highway of Death. When Iraq invaded Kuwait, the United Nations put their foot down. After only a few months, the UN coalition forces drove the Iraqis straight out of Kuwait, making thousands of soldiers retreat across the vast expanses of the desert, blowing up gas deposits, lighting the sky on fire. Though one of the main events remembered from the war was the Highway of Death. In full retreat along Highway 80 that runs from Kuwait City to Basra, Iraq, thousands of soldiers drove vehicles or marched away with absolutely no ability to fight back. American and Canadian forces rained death from the skies with air attacks that could never be repelled. Images of thousands of vehicles abandoned or destroyed showed utter destruction for miles and miles. Fiery traffic jams became nightmares, and at least 1,000 troops lay dead while most ran for their lives from the chasing coalition ground troops. They had no chance. Number 3. The Battle of Kursk. 2 million Russian soldiers faced off against 800,000 Axis on the Eastern Front. Though the fighting was fierce all around, the most famous battle was the Battle of Prokhorovka, the largest tank battle in the history of warfare. 2/3 of the Russian tank army were made up of T-34 medium tanks, while a third were made up of self-propelled guns and light tanks. The Germans, however, had the best tanks ever known to man. In the first Battle of Prokhorovka, 300 Russian tanks rolled down Hill 252.2 towards German positions early in the morning. In utter amazement, German tanks fired flares to warn of an assault. The entire horizon was covered with tanks for as far as they could see. With a relatively small army and average defensive positions, the Germans were able to pick off a large number of tanks to a loss of a few of their own. Their number 1 Tiger tanks even reached a ratio of 12-1 on just the first day. Many tanks fought point blank, metal-to-metal gun barrels pointed straight at each other's throats. Though the Russians lost the Battle of Prokhorovka, they forced the Germans to retreat. Their best tanks were too damaged to be used, and they feared they would be surrounded. 400 Russian tanks were sacrificed to destroy just 43 German ones, but they did eventually succeed in taking ground. In the larger Battle of Kursk itself, 800,000 Russian casualties were sustained to the Axis 200,000. Number 2. The Huaihai Campaign. After World War II ended, China was divided into the republic led by the KMT and the Communist Party. The Communists marched south with over 7 million troops versus just 800,000 KMT soldiers. Continuously flanking and surrounding the KMT with their overwhelming numbers, the Loyalists had no chance. Crossing the river at Zhujiao led to 30,000 casualties alone. Many garrisons were laid siege to, and those who did not surrender for food were wiped out tens of thousands at a time. Many armies tried to break free, but sustained even more casualties. Winter weather made it impossible to provide air support. 500,000 of the 800,000 strong KMT army were decimated in heavy snow, and the United States withdrew their support completely, knowing that it was a losing battle. The Communists lost only 130,000. The KMT fled to Taiwan, and China slowly fell to the grips of the Red Chinese Army. Number 1. The Siege of Baghdad. Not so much of a battle as a massacre. In 1258 CE, 150,000 of the Mongol horde raped and pillaged along their way to Europe. Arriving at Baghdad, a garrison of 50,000 soldiers were asked to surrender. Unconfident with their odds, they did, which was an incredibly painful mistake. The Mongols immediately slaughtered all 50,000 of the warriors, and then entered the city, slaughtering up to 2 million of the civilians, looting, murdering, and raping their way to a new kind of hell. Nearly every last person in the city was killed. It was from instances like this where the Mongols made their name of the most terrifying force from the east.